Over the last 2 years, K-pop has moved through a variety of trends in song composition and production. One of the most creatively interesting trends has definitely been the proliferation of songs which sample from classical music. From Red Velvet to Blackpink, producers have combined K-pop with classics from centuries past, leading to the creation of many distinctive and innovative tracks. Having played classical music for most of my life, whenever a track sampling classical music is released, I take an immediate interest in it. Integrating K-pop with classical music is a feat of creativity which I always admire producers for attempting. While listening to these tracks, I tried to draw trends across songs about the ways in which classical music was incorporated, as well as how effective I thought the track was. From this, I found there were roughly 3 different strategies, or methods, in which classical music was included. In this video, I will analyze each of these 3 methods and provide examples of a few songs which exemplify each, generally going from my least to most liked track in each section. I provided chapters for each song, so please skip around to tracks you're most interested to hear commentary on. Without further ado, let's get into the first method. The first trend I've noticed in the way K-pop songs include classical music samples is what I will call name dropping. A very short, recognizable snippet of a popular classical piece is intermittently referenced. Its influence and overall presence in the song is usually pretty isolated to the short moments where it is sampled. I cannot talk about classical music sampling in K-pop without mentioning probably the most recognizable piece in all of classical music, Fur Elise. In case you've been living under a rock, here's a quick snippet of Fur Elise. Fur Elise is certainly the most referenced classical piece in K-pop music. Many K-pop songs reference this little clipped section of the melody and nothing else, in the name-dropping style I discussed earlier. And this is no exception for the 3 songs I'm about to discuss for the name-dropping method: Snowy by ITZY, Because by Dreamcatcher, and Bye Bye by Red Velvet. Each of these Fur Elise sampling songs is able to integrate the classical motif with varying degrees of success. And let's start by looking at Snowy by ITZY. In my opinion, the weakest of the 3 tracks I just named has to be Snowy. Snowy begins by immediately referencing Fur Elise very explicitly in its very first melody line, and from these first few seconds of the intro, the song has already set itself up poorly. The fundamental issue with using Fur Elise is that it is so recognizable to the point that wherever I hear it, I get distracted and thrown out of the experience of listening to the song. Using Fur Elise so overtly and brazenly as the opening line of the song immediately alienates me from the beginning. The use of Fur Elise is particularly distracting in Snowy because Snowy is conceptually a Christmas song with a stereotypical shimmery, bright sleigh bell percussion and the whole shebang. This combined with Fur Elise creates a messy picture, and it feels like the classical sample is thrown in every once in a while amidst the Christmas time bop the rest of the song is trying to be. I would argue that the sample doesn't mesh well with the sonic vision of Snowy as a whole. So moving on, like Snowy, I feel that the way Fur Elise is sampled in Because by Dreamcatcher doesn't really meld with the overall vision of the track. Because I like you. Because is a Halloween concept song with an overall haunting and mysterious aesthetic. Overall, I enjoy this song a lot, but again, I would argue the Fur Elise reference is unnecessary and doesn't really add anything to the track. Dreamcatcher certainly has a very maximalist sound, and Because is no exception. Because has a lot going on, switching between bass-heavy Latin beats, rock-inspired choruses, breakbeat sections in the second verse, and a minimalist bridge, just to name a few elements. The song juggles a lot of different textures and contrasting moments, and just like Snowy, the super recognizable fur-release reference randomly strewn into one line of the chorus melody is jarring and takes me outside of the haunting sound of the track. I certainly enjoy BEcuase a lot more than Snowy, which is more of a filler B-side in the context of ITZY's discography, but again, the sample is not really necessary here and doesn't really fluidly mesh with the other elements. Snowy and BEcuase demonstrate that songs that intermittently reference small little clips of fur-release, in this method I would call name dropping, have to balance both making the sample recognizable to the audience as a little Easter egg moment, and also it being integrated well enough to not be too distracting and incoherent with the rest of the song. On the other hand, Bye Bye by Red Velvet is able to manage this precarious balancing act.
Bye bye bye. Bye bye bye.
Just like Snowy, Bye Bye opens by immediately referencing the iconic fur-release riff. However, unlike Snowy, in Bye Bye it is significantly transformed. The introduction is produced in a way which creates a sultry, languid, retro sound, and is at a significantly slower tempo than the original fur-release. The verses build on this foundation and are minimalist, highlighting synths, layered vocals, and MIDI trumpet with a lot of space in the production. After this, fur-release only appears in the chorus as a central part of the melody, with a more filled-out instrumentation with a trap beat and synths underneath. The whole production, especially the rich vocal layering and production, screams Red Velvet in every way. Bye Bye is fundamentally different from BEcuase and Snowy because the fur-release melody is fundamentally transformed and repurposed to reconcile the sample with the musical identity of the artist and the song. While Snowy and BEcuase reference fur-release, Bye Bye repurposes it. Therefore, when I listen to Bye Bye, instead of sounding gimmicky or out of place, the fur-release sample seems creative and almost a little cheeky. So, to conclude in this section, I've looked at 3 different tracks which use fur-release in a name-dropping way, where a short and recognizable sample appears infrequently throughout the song. I believe that this style of classical music sampling is most effective when the sample is thoughtfully transformed and integrated, so that whenever it appears, it is like a cute Easter egg instead of a jarring addition. Many K-pop songs choose to go farther and integrate classical music samples more frequently than name dropping. In this section, I'm going to talk about songs which, like the previous section, feature a single, short classical music motif, but use it more comprehensively. The sample is interspersed throughout the instrumental and melodies of the entire track, and is the central element which informs the color and concept of the entire song. I'm going to call this conceptual sampling, where the choice of sample informs the basic musical and artistic concept as well as the style of the entire era. I promise this is the last time I'm going to talk about fur-release, but I don't think this video would be complete without talking about Hands Up by Cherry Bullet. Hands Up begins with a synthetic, metallic version of the fur-release melody, immediately setting up the sonic concept of a minimalist and textured instrumental which is used throughout the rest of the song. The fur-release line is directly sampled in the instrumental at the transitions between phrases and lines throughout the song, and is sometimes panned back and forth for variety, but it is definitely most prominent right before the chorus. The chorus melody and instrumental use a lot of the rapid half-step or small interval motion, mimicking the melody of the fur-release sample, and generally makes the song cohesive. Overall, Hands Up is much more thorough and frequent in its inclusion of fur-release compared to the songs in the name-dropping section, and there's a lot of cute little details which make its integration a lot smoother, such as having piano chords pretty far back in the mix to connect with the classical music influence of the song. However, I would say it's weaker compared to the songs I'm going to talk about next, mostly because of the inherent problems there are to sampling fur-release that I've already touched on before, and because fur-release doesn't easily connect with common K-pop concepts and doesn't easily translate to a specific visual image. However, In the vein of songs that use classical music to enhance its sonic and visual concept, I have to talk about Fantasy by VIXX, which samples Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven.
You are my fantasy. Just a fantasy.
Moonlight Sonata is a piano piece by Beethoven which is sparse, melancholic, and almost haunting in the sadness it conveys, making it a perfect fit for the fantastical and emotional concept of fantasy. Fantasy starts out with the opening lines of Moonlight Sonata, featuring only the piano and vocals and creating a dark, moody, and emotional atmosphere. As the verse progresses, the bass and sparse rhythm section are added and built upon, with the Moonlight sample going farther back into the mix, until it is eventually completely transitioned out in the pre-chorus. Then, in the chorus, the instrumental is much more filled out than the verse, and it is very dense and layered with strings, an intense trap beat, and a sweeping vocal line with lots of layering. The rest of the song generally follows this pattern, with more minimalist verses sampling Moonlight Sonata, followed by filled out choruses. Because of this, Fantasy has two distinct characters: lower energy and atmospheric verses, and high intensity dramatic choruses. The quieter, melancholic verses contrast with the chorus and make the chorus seem even more emotional. The Moonlight Sonata sample is the key element that creates the melancholic and sad energy of the verses, and the sensibility of classical music is built upon in the chorus instrumentation using a lot of strings. The song ends as it started, with a plaintive arpeggiations of Moonlight Sonata with minimal vocals, slowly vanishing into nothingness before the phrase even resolves. As I mentioned before, Fantasy uses Moonlight Sonata to access and accentuate its musical concept. In my opinion, K-pop songs that attempt this type of edginess and yearning emotions are rarely ever successful in executing this concept without being cringe or seeming like they are trying way too hard. Comparing Fantasy back to Hands Up by Cherry Bullet, I think Fantasy is significantly more successful because of this close connection between the classical sample and the concept of the song. While the use of Moonlight Sonata in Fantasy is relatively simple, it is effective, making it one of the best examples of classical music sampling to be found in K-pop, in my humble opinion. Finally, the last song I'm going to talk about that features classical music sampling as the core aspect of its concept is Shutdown by Blackpink.
Blackpink in your area. Blackpink in your area.
Like most of the tracks I've discussed thus far, Shutdown opens with a violin playing the first few notes of the sampled melody, in this case La Campanella, setting it up as a central instrumental motif of the song. This 4-count phrase is looped throughout the entirety of the intro and first verse, only being taken away along with the bass in the pre-chorus to make the beat drop of the chorus hit harder, at which point both the bass and the violin riff return. The riff is then transformed and the instrumentation changes in the bridge and final chorus to create a high energy ending, but other than this, the La Campanella sample is included basically identically and repeated throughout the entirety of the song. I think Shutdown is super effective and very intentional in its use of the sample. Using a little 4-beat snippet and looping it throughout the entire instrumental reconciles classical music sampling with the sensibilities of Blackpink's hip-hop sound. The melodies and rap of the song always complement the sample, and it never feels out of place or distracting from anything else that is happening. The integration of the sample is harmonious, cohesive, and extracts every ounce of goodness out of that little single motif, and successfully recontextualizes classical music into a hip-hop inspired K-pop song. The only criticism I could imagine for Shutdown would not be in the actual song itself, but in the general philosophy of how the classical music was sampled in the first place. Shutdown, as well as all of the other songs I've discussed aside from Fantasy, uses only a few beats, not even a complete phrase, of a classical music piece. This definitely comes off as a bit gimmicky to an audience of listeners who would be familiar with the classical music these songs reference, which, granted, is a very minuscule portion of the K-pop fanbase. Before I get into the last method of sampling classical music, I thought I'd make a quick compilation of other K-pop songs which are inspired or directly reference classical music, which I didn't talk about in this video. I did consider talking about many of these, but in the interest of your time and mind, I ended up cutting this video down by quite a bit. Let's get into these tracks.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 지금부턴 다섯.
There is one song which samples from its source material in a more complex and complete way, and unlike all the other songs I've discussed previously, can truly be said as paying true homage to everything classical music has to offer. To no one's surprise, I'm of course talking about Feel My Rhythm by the one and only Red Velvet. What makes Feel My Rhythm so unique to me is that it references multiple sections of Air on G String by Bach, and the classical music is incorporated in so many different ways and functions in so many different ways throughout the track. The intro to the song is very whimsical and ethereal, with super reverby vocals over the intro of the Bach piece. This section is similar to how Fantasy by VIXX uses Moonlight Sonata, in that the intro is able to immediately create a fantastical, nostalgic aesthetic and concept, and the classical music and vocals fit together so perfectly. In the verses, and in particular the transitions between sections, the Bach riff is chopped up and spliced into the instrumental, stitched together with the chords and the percussion. In the reaction to this track, React to the K talked about how the producers were able to integrate the harmonic sensibilities of Bach with those of pop music, which is an amazing feat. Throughout the verses, the bass is definitely the standout, particularly in the pre-chorus, which has super cool runs which are just ear candy. In the chorus, the songs becomes more expansive. Instead of being integrated with the rhythm section and the chords, the classical music sample is now used as a sort of counter melody against the main melody sung by the members, and adds an extra dimension to the melody. The bridge brings back the ethereal, whimsy character of the intro, with super reverby Wendy vocals over the Bach. Here, the producers used the B section of the Air on G string, which is super unique and shows a real love and commitment to the material being referenced. In all the songs I talked about previously, only a short snippet of the most famous melody is sampled from. The bridge then changes character, featuring a lot of really cool synth production that culminates in a super satisfying key change. So throughout Feel My Rhythm, the classical music samples are weaving in and out of the track, in harmony with other elements of the production. I really enjoyed the maximalist, highly produced nature of the track because the classical music is completely recontextualized into Red Velvet and is K-popified. Feel My Rhythm works and is super effective whether or not you are familiar with Bach. The strings and melodies match the visual and sonic concept of the comeback, so if you're unfamiliar with the classical music being referenced, it is blended in seamlessly. To those who are familiar with Bach, the sample is so creatively and extensively integrated that you can't help but be amazed by the creativity of the producers. Unlike most of the songs I discussed, Feel My Rhythm definitely does not come off as gimmicky. Overall, Feel My Rhythm was definitely one of my favorite tracks released last year, and demonstrated how much Red Velvet continues to offer to the industry. The trend of classical music sampling in K-pop has been really fun to follow, and shows the longevity of classical music as well as the creativity only K-pop can achieve, and I hope producers continue to take inspiration from such creative sources. So thank you so much for listening to my analysis and making it to the end of the video. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these tracks, as well as the classical music sampling in general, in the comment section below. With that, hide out.